up the whole. If you didn't know, this is our broadcast division, American Family Radio. We also have a national Christian news service, American Family News. And then there's our governmental affairs affiliate, AFA Action. But that's still not all. We've got a video streaming service, AFA Stream. 1 Million Moms defends our kids against exploitation in entertainment media. If you enjoy faith-based blogs, you'll love The Stand. And if you want to find great resources and gifts, there's the AFA Resource Center. After all that, there's still more. So stop by afa.net/connect and stay connected to help you and your family stay informed, equipped, and ready to take action. afa.net/connect.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, December 9th, and the midterm elections are just continuing to heat up, of course. The composition of the Congress and also of the Senate will be a very big deal for the back half of Donald Trump's term. And the Senate race out of Texas is shaping up to be very interesting. Colin Allred, you'll remember he had challenged Senator Ted Cruz in that last race, and he ended up finishing about 8 points behind, so Ted Cruz solidly won. Colin Allred ended his Senate bid hours before Jasmine Crockett, who has been a firebrand Texas representative on the Democrat side, launched her campaign. So this headline coming from Fox News, Democrat Colin Allred admits, of course, Jasmine Crockett is a factor in him dropping out of the Texas Senate race. So does she really have a chance to, are we going to really have to put up with her in the Senate? Well, you know, one never knows, but let's welcome in Tony Ortiz, who is founder of Current Revolt and is there in Texas. So, Tony, it seems like the Democrats are just going for kind of some popularity here, maybe, or at least just some name recognition over substance. What's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think, as some of the sound bits from earlier said, there's no way Texas is going to see a Senator Jasmine Crockett. It's just not going to happen. This is, as you said, a popularity run, maybe to get some attention, maybe to get some people turned out to vote down ballot. But as far as Crockett actually succeeding in her run for Senate, it's highly unlikely. If a Democrat was to be asked to be taken seriously for that run, it would probably be James Tallarico, but not Jasmine Crockett.
So do you think that she'll have a contested primary then, or are the Democrats going to try to run her? And then, if she ends up failing ultimately in the general, she'll just kind of do the speaking circuit and they're getting her out of the House? Or what's possibly their logic here?
Yeah, not really sure. And it'll be interesting. James Tallarico is a Texas state representative who's obviously going to be in a primary against her. And he has already put out a video, which is kind of odd, telling his staff and supporters not to be aggressive or to attack Jasmine Crockett. And I think he's kind of underestimating maybe that her willingness to maybe attack him. But he, Tallarico has been doing the media circuit. He did Joe Rogan podcast. He's been well received by Texas Democrats across the state, whereas Jasmine Crockett is mostly popular in her district. I think most, at least highly intelligent or intelligent Democrats don't see her as a serious candidate. I mean, even her history in office, she's been serving since, I believe, 2023. 2023, she's sponsored around 42 bills, and only one has passed the House of Representatives, and the other has just died in the Senate. So she's been largely ineffective just in her current role. I don't see how her running for a bigger role makes any sense.
Yeah, well, perhaps it's not necessarily something coordinated. She just thinks she's popular enough and is trying to go for the Senate, but it's not necessarily the best move from the Democrat side. But it's interesting that Colin Allred wouldn't want to run against her in a primary. When he backed out, that was the speculation. And then, of course, the next morning, yesterday morning, Jasmine Crockett announced her run for Senate. So, what's possibly the contemplation there? Do they just, it seems like Democrats just anymore really don't want a lot of contested primaries. They would rather kind of coordinate their one person and then move into the general rather than actually go through the process. And primaries are actually a thing, and it seems like Democrats just don't really want to participate anymore.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think they're trying to coalesce behind just one candidate and reduce the chances of a contested primary, or maybe losing some support, right? Primaries can be often very bloody, and I think Democrats want to give the impression that they're all unified behind one candidate. Before Allred dropped, it was Tallarico, Crockett, and then Allred, and then, people were already asking Allred to drop in his run against for Senate. He's largely unimpressive here in Texas. I can tell you from the ground here, even Democrats don't find him exciting or impressive or anything. His political ads have been kind of questionable, and he was already receiving calls to drop. And I think when Jasmine Crockett announced her run, that was kind of the nail in the coffin for him to pivot to another run for something else.
That's really interesting. And do you find, Tony Ortiz, that is because he's, Colin Allred is a little bit more of a adult maybe than Jasmine Crockett, and they seem to go for these really far left kind of firebrands like the AOCs and the Mamdanis, who have this big social media following that don't really have any substance behind it. So is it more just that he lacks kind of that social media persona, or what do you attribute that to?
I think you're 100% right there, too. I think that politics, as I'm sure you're aware, has kind of largely devolved to kind of celebrity type debates and arguments over policy. You're kind of people and the parties are more interested in propping up celebrity politicians than they are maybe of ones of substance. That's common across both parties. And, Crockett comes off as a firebrand that has a lot of really great good speaking points in the sense of they're exciting maybe if you're a Democrat, right? And Allred's a little more mild, a little more boring. And while he may be maybe more intelligent or maybe have better policy experience or more success in his political roles, Crockett is more of a firebrand, more outspoken. And I think that's what kind of maybe led to him being pushed out.
It is really sad, the state of affairs, when the social media persona and the following and kind of this, all of these clickbait sort of celebrity influencers end up becoming politicians. And that's really the direction of politics with the rise of social media. That could be a whole other topic for another day. And I think we've talked about that pretty extensively anyway on this program. But I'm speaking with Tony Ortiz, who's the founder of Current Revolt. And, let's talk about the Republican side, because if Jasmine Crockett does end up prevailing over James Tallarico, or he ends up not even running, and he ends up dropping out, she's going to face some pretty tough opposition from Republicans. So as you mentioned at the top, this is really no guarantee that we'll have to put up with her in the Senate. But she's vying to take the seat of longtime Republican incumbent John Cornyn. And he's facing a very stiff primary on the Republican side, which, I think is a great thing. I am all for primaries and for Republicans actually choosing, the best, like choose your player and actually choosing the best. And so current Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is, of course, running against Cornyn, and then also U.S. Congressman Wesley Hunt from Houston. So how do you see that race shaping out, and what are you hearing on the ground there in Texas?
Yeah, the race for Republicans, the primary race for that Senate spot has been largely exciting and a lot of back and forth from supporters across all the candidates, right? Cornyn supporters make the argument that, Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's running for his spot, is unelectable, that he's going to struggle because of his affair scandals and things like that. Ken Paxton has made the argument that Cornyn has been ineffective and he's anti-Trump and that he's kind of a moderate. Whereas Wesley Hunt has come in and said, both of these guys aren't all that great and I'm the choice for you. And what's interesting, though, is that recent polling has shown that Wesley Hunt is growing. His support is really growing across the state. And in a recent poll, I believe it showed that Hunt was actually beating both Cornyn and Paxton in a one-on-one.
That's really interesting. I have not yet seen that poll, and it seemed like he was kind of the third player in this race between Cornyn and Paxton. But that's really fascinating. And so, is that what's his name recognition like across the state? Because obviously, I think people are very familiar with Cornyn, and then Ken Paxton. Who prevailed against what I think was a ridiculous sham attempt at an impeachment a little bit ago. So I mean, he's come out with a lot of significant wins, but does have some of that back history. But what about Wesley Hunt? I mean, is he well known across Texas?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag there. I know that Hunt is doing the media circuit. He's doing the tours across Texas. He's showing up to political galas and club meetings, and he's giving his speeches. If one hasn't seen Wesley Hunt give his political speech, it is quite good at appealing towards the Republican right, and his message is pretty strong. He's a good speaker, that's for sure. Whereas Ken Paxton is well established. He's a phenomenal attorney general, probably the best the United States has seen on a state basis in a very, very long time. So both of these guys, one is running off of his success and his career as an attorney general. The other one is running off of his speaking points and his ability to be a state senator or a U.S. senator. But right now, as far as name recognition, I think that at least among Republicans, Ken Paxton is more well-known.
Yeah, and I've just pulled up this poll you were referring to, and it was the McLaughlin poll. New York Post reported on it that Cornyn trails Texas rivals in head-to-head GOP primary poll. And so overall, if it's all three of them, currently it's Paxton at 33%, Hunt at 28%, and Cornyn at 27%. But as you mentioned, Tony Ortiz, in the head-to-head, Hunt against Paxton, it leads 45%. Hunt against Cornyn leads 50% to 35%. And then if it's Paxton to Cornyn head-to-head, Paxton wins at 44% and Cornyn at 40%. I think this at least, any way that you slice it, shows that Cornyn is not popular and, has widely, I think, been considered kind of a rhino, not really, as you mentioned, kind of up with the MAGA agenda and the America First agenda. And so, it's been interesting to see that at least so far, President Trump hasn't weighed into that race. Do you see that changing at all with maybe some of these polling numbers as we get closer to March 3rd, which will be the primary?
What's interesting about that is Cornyn slightly signaled, at least on social media, that he was anticipating President Trump to get involved somehow. And he was lightly signaling that President Trump was going to endorse him. I don't know if that's likely. I think if there's a runoff, you may see President Trump get in. But as far as leading up to the primary and the actual election, I don't know. It's hard to say whether President Trump will get involved or not in that race.
Yeah, so it's always hard to predict what President Trump will do. So I think that's very fair, and it may just be sort of wishful thinking on Cornyn's part to suggest or maybe lightly signal that he anticipates that kind of endorsement just as perhaps the incumbent, he anticipates that, but you never know. And, Trump has been known to jump in to primaries, even, very last minute, almost kind of seeing where the trends are going. Obviously that was J.D. Vance's Senate race in Ohio back in 2022, where President Trump didn't jump in until, really kind of the last minute. And then Vance, of course, prevailed in that primary. So it's going to be really interesting, though, because Trump, of course, has worked with Wesley Hunt in Congress, Cornyn in the Senate, and of course loves Ken Paxton. So that's going to be really fascinating to see what happens. A lot gearing up for the midterms already, but Tony Ortiz, really appreciate it. You can find him at Current Revolt, and we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. A vacation with a purpose. That's what we call our tours here at American Family Radio, American Family Association, because we go and we see and we do and we have great fellowship and fun and food, but we also have a purpose in visiting the places we go to, a spiritual purpose, a historical purpose, and that's going to include our tours in 2026. Here are the tours. We're going to Washington, D.C. We're going to George Washington's Mount Vernon. We're going to Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. We're going to Boston, Massachusetts. So if you want information on any of those tours for 2026, the dates, the prices, the itinerary, go to this website, wildmangroup.com, WILDMON group.com, and we hope to see you on one of our 2026 Spiritual Heritage Tours.
Hey everybody, it's Chad with the band Unspoken. I've seen firsthand how powerful it is when the church comes together, and that's exactly what Redeem Health Share is all about. With rising medical costs, Redeem offers a more affordable way to care for your family. Their flexible programs are designed to fit your budget without sacrificing your values. Each month, members contribute a share amount to help pay each other's medical bills, and you choose the providers and the treatments that are right for your family. It's not just about the money, it's about community. Redeem Health Share is rooted in biblical principles. So whether it's a routine visit or sudden emergency, there's a caring Christian community walking with you every step of the way. This time of the year is a great reminder to make choices that reflect our faith. So if you're looking for another way forward, one that reflects your faith, this is it. Call 844-REDEEM-0 today. Join the movement, share joyfully, and live redeemed.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. Christian leaders say Chick-fil-A has waffled on same-sex marriage. More than a decade ago, Christians around the nation rallied to defend the fast food restaurant after gay marriage activists declared war. They tried to put Chick-fil-A out of business after the son of founder Truett Cathy said marriage is between one man and one woman. But it appears there's been a cultural shift at Chick-fil-A, a Utah franchise posting photos on its Facebook page celebrating the marriage of two men. In recent years, Chick-fil-A stopped donating to Salvation Army and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes after pressure from gay rights groups. Governor Mike Huckabee said his decision to lead that nationwide campaign to support Chick-fil-A was his biggest regret. And many loyal customers are wondering if Chick-fil-A's values were simply a marketing ploy to endear themselves to Christians. Regardless, traditional values have been taken off the menu at Chick-fil-A, just like the chicken salad sandwich and the coleslaw. I'm Todd Stearns.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, a really important case concerning campaign finance and the Federal Election Campaign Act, or the FECA, is being argued at the Supreme Court this morning. So the case is National Republican Senatorial Committee versus Federal Election Commission. And this actually involves J.D. Vance as well as one of the challengers is arguing concerns around federal limits on how much political parties can spend in coordination with a candidate for federal office. So the law in question, again, part of that Federal Election Campaign Act, distinguishes between independent expenditures not coordinated with a candidate, which aren't capped, and coordinated expenditures, which are capped. And so a 2001 precedent, FEC versus the Colorado Republican Federal Campaign Committee, had upheld those caps as constitutional. And now the challengers, including Vice President Vance and the NRSC, and also the National Republican Congressional Committee, or the NRCC, are asking the Supreme Court to overrule that decision. So what would the impact and the fallout be? Well, let's welcome in Mark Wheat. He is the AAF Chief Counsel and has been following this closely. So Mark, what are the challengers really asking for in terms of removing these caps, and why is this ultimately a good thing for Republicans?
Well, the focus on this is eliminating these caps that are unfairly shackling political parties, because political parties should be able to coordinate their spending with other candidates. And by a bad Supreme Court case that's, 24 years old, they're not able to. They have severe limits on their freedom of association and freedom of speech. And so, there's an unanticipated result that what has happened is that this has empowered so-called super PACs, which are not tied to political parties. They're tied to individual candidates. Oftentimes they're linked to special interests outside the party structure. And we just think that that is not healthy for the American Republic. We think that conservatives do better when people can get together and celebrate their freedom of speech and freedom of association and work out issues through a party process so that there is a stronger, clearer message of what one party will deliver after the next elections. And I think that where we've seen strong positions taken by a party like, a generation ago, Republicans got together with the Contract with America and really pushed a party platform through that contract and took the House majority for the first time since the 1950s. So we just think that this is a very important case. We're glad that it has finally come up to the Supreme Court. And now that we have a conservative majority, we're hoping for the best.
Yeah, and I mean, this makes sense that the restrictions on a political party's ability to associate with and advocate for their own candidates would be an infringement on First Amendment free speech and freedom of association rights. And so what was the original rationale? I mean, and this is just as recent as 2021, so we're only talking about 24 years ago, but what was the rationale for the Supreme Court to decide originally that these caps were fair and not an infringement?
There's always this thought that if we just restricted the amount of spending in political campaigns, that there will be a decrease in official corruption. And I think the opposite is actually the case. The more you restrict people's ability to use their dollars to speak for them, you tilt the balance of the playing field into those areas where you have huge get out the vote efforts by unions. There's door-to-door campaigns that are pushed by teachers who are not necessarily there advocating for children. They're there for advocating for their own best interests. So it's really important that the American traditions of freedom of association and freedom of speech be unfettered and allow people to organize in the best way that they can. And so I just don't think that where we were 24 years ago on trying to eliminate corruption in the system, we're not any closer by restricting people's freedoms. I think the opposite would be the case.
Yeah, and so what are it would seem like I think the opponents to this. I mean, this would make sense for both Republicans and Democrats to kind of want this sort of unfettered and unrestricted freedom of association and freedom of speech and the right to coordinate with candidates and to advocate for their candidates. And so what is the opposition arguing? Why? I mean, obviously you mentioned that this would decrease corruption, but then if we've seen what's gone through PACs and super PACs, but what are we likely to hear in terms of objections to this?
Well, the people on the left, their arguments are different, I think, than where their interests actually are. I think the argument that they are looking for is that money, particularly money that is not clear how it's being spent or where it's being spent, increases corruption. This is one of their arguments for government financing of political campaigns. and where you actually just get a check from the government and you spend that budget and no more on a political campaign. Why does the left pursue this? Because they have a very complex ecosystem of special interest groups, primarily made up of labor unions that can get out the vote and do different kinds of political spending that are largely unregulated by the federal election laws. So that's why you see two Republican candidates, the National Republican Congressional Committee and the National Republican Senatorial Committee, bringing this suit, because people on the right don't have the same kind of system set up that the people on the left do.
Yeah, so this seems like a classic case of trying to hold Republicans to rules and restrictions, and Democrats kind of operating outside of that framework. And so they don't want to lose their advantage in a lot of ways, which is just typical, I think, for how Democrats operate. But practically speaking, Mark Wheat, my special guest this morning, AAF Chief Counsel, what would this mean for the 2026 and 2028 campaigns? Because would this only impact federal elections, or would this also impact state elections?
Well, all money is fungible, and impacts that you would have at a federal level, and this would be going after federal candidates. The more coordination that you could do between a political party and its candidates, you're going to get a clearer vision for what the parties stand for, and so that will end up, the messaging will filter down into all races where people compete on a partisan basis. Not every election is clearly partisan. You might have local elections where you're not allowed to identify by party on the ballot, but it's pretty clear who the liberals are and the conservatives are. But I think that what this will do is this will strengthen party messaging. It will make party platforms more important because there will be some kind of an agenda that's put forward, and people will be more likely to hold candidates accountable the stronger the parties are and the stronger the identification. I think this will be healthy for our republic. I think it will also lower the temperature in a way, and that is people can be focusing more on issues and less on personalities. The odd thing is
that'd be a good thing.
Yeah, and I think by having stronger parties, you're actually going to have less mudslinging, because people will be focusing on an agenda. So, is it going to make politics something that we all gravitate to? No. This is, but we have to do small steps in a positive direction. This is one of those steps that I think will be significant. It won't be the end-all, be-all. There will be lots of issues that we still have to work through on how we elect candidates, but this will be a good first step.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way that we can get away from the fact that politics overall is dirty, and in some sense, but any way of kind of reorganizing it or focusing, as you said, on issues and effectiveness, not so much just personality, is really important. I was talking to the guest in the last segment about how Democrats are putting up a lot of these, real firebrand kind of social media driven candidates when they really don't have kind of that winning message at all. And it seems like hopefully the Republicans are shifting a little bit, and hopefully to messaging. And I think President Trump and the Trump mandate won overwhelmingly in 2024 because of the message. I mean, obviously there's the strong cult of personality around Trump, and everybody recognizes that. But the message, of closed borders, the economy, the American dream, I mean, all of those things that were built into that Trump mandate were very important in that election. And so how would this potentially, if at all, affect primary races?
Well, in primaries, typically parties tend to not engage and not weigh in during a primary election, but that could change. Particularly where the parties see their overall fortunes being threatened by wackos who are really on the outer edge of the party. They're not really part of the party structure. You see AOC in New York. You see these Somali extremists in St. Paul, Minneapolis. There are elements of sort of like the Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes people flirting with Nazi and racist values. Parties have an obligation to protect themselves against wackos. And so it could be that where there are primaries that will threaten the outcome in a general election, parties will engage and will keep people out. Back in the early 1960s, late 50s, early 60s, William F. Buckley Jr., who we're celebrating his centennial this year, he read out conspiracy theorists from the conservative movement. This is the John Birch Society. And he just felt that the John Birch Society was confusing conservative people with their outlandish conspiracy theories. And so the role that William F. Buckley played to safeguard early conservatism is the same role that the major political parties need to protect themselves from socialists and communists in the left of the Democratic Party and anti-Semites on both sides of the parties. It's a significant problem that is becoming mainstreamed, and it's time for the parties to step up and keep these people out of the political process.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, that's a really important point that I think is missed overall when we tend to, as regular voters, just think of elections, as it's always just been between, Republican versus Democrat, and we don't necessarily think of the parties as themselves having the constitutionally protected right to freedom of association. And not everyone who just says that they want to run as a Republican or earn the nomination of that party necessarily has that right. I mean, we saw that in the Tennessee 5 primary where Robbie Starbuck was ultimately kicked off the ballot as a Republican because he didn't meet the qualifications of the party. And there was a lot of uproar about that and whether, that was right. And, the party should have done that. But ultimately, however anyone feels about that particular instance, I think that's the most current or most recent example of a party kind of ousting someone. That is the party's right because they are private entities, and so to keep those kind of boundaries and contours from kind of some of these extremists, I think is actually a good thing we need to be talking about more.
Well, and it happened in a catastrophic way in Illinois in the elections in 1986. In the Democratic primary, there were two mainstream Democrats running. One was named Sangmeister and one was named Paczynski. And they were up against candidates who had plain vanilla white bread names like Hart and I can't remember. It's like English sounding names, right? And so people outside of the Chicago area presumed rightly that the people with the ethnic sounding names were Chicagoans, and so they voted against Chicago. What the candidates they ended up electing were followers of this political extremist Lyndon LaRouche, who was a massive conspiracy theorist, and his followers were like zombies. And they believed things that, like, the Queen of England was secretly controlling the world through the narcotics trade. I mean, all kinds of things like that. But the Democratic Party was somewhat powerless to police their primary system by attacking these people as extremists. And because they were unable to do that, the Democratic Party were completely trounced in the general election because they elected two nuts during the primary. And we're kind of in that situation again going into elections next year, where you see more and more wackos on the far left of the Democratic Party saying that they're going to primary regular Democrats and defeat them. And we're worried on the right that this anti-Israel stuff being promulgated by key spokesmen like Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes might attract the wrong kind of candidates that would knock off regular conservatives from getting elected to Congress.
Yeah, that is a huge concern, and I'm really glad that you raised that. And so what are, in just the last couple of minutes we have left here in this segment, Marquise, and I really appreciate you joining, what are the best ways that are currently available to both parties? But I'm, of course, more concerned, at least in the primaries, about what the Republicans are doing to ensure that that maybe the tent, everybody wants kind of a big tent, but even a big tent still has boundaries and contours and borders, and to say that not everyone who just wants to identify as a Republican is and can run on that ticket and can say, I'm the one that is upholding conservatism, when they really aren't. And a lot of these, key issues like homosexual marriage, or, some of these social issues that a lot of the new right is kind of saying, well, we don't really care about that because we're only focused on the economy. Or, as you rightly point out, this kind of anti-Semitic, anti-Israel message that is creeping in, I think, to try to marginalize evangelicals and the old establishment guard, and basically trying to reform the party from within. What are the best options available currently to the Republican Party, and how might this Supreme Court case change that for the better?
On Advancing American Freedom's website, we have the NRSC brief that we filed with the Supreme Court. You could just, do word search on NRSC and you could see our brief. There are just, arguments that we put in there that it is part of our heritage going all the way back to the founding, and as identified by early observers of America, that we are best when we are allowed our freedom of speech and our freedom of association. And there are some good arguments in there for people to write letters to the editor or communicate with the political party of their choice to say, hey, what are you doing to keep communists out of my party? What are you doing to keep out anti-Israel activists from my party? And engage in the process. You will find that going to a political meeting is very easy, very low cost, and just speak up. Speak up. That is how you actually have the biggest impact, is by speaking with people in real life and having a conversation. Don't jump to social media. It does nothing. It just inflames people. Go and talk with your neighbors. Talk with people in your community. Write to your local newspaper to say, this is something, as an evangelical, am very concerned about these things. What can we do as a community to protect ourselves from extremists trying to take the label of a major political party?
Really, really well said.
And complicated. I don't think it's complicated, but it's something that you can't do in your easy chair. You have to get up and talk with somebody.
Well, and we have to take ownership of a citizen-led government and not just rely on the political parties to say, well, primaries don't matter and there's always a lower turnout and, whoever is the Republican candidate, well, we just vote down ticket, and the Democrats do the same thing. They just vote, kind of for whoever, and then we don't really participate in the process overall, and especially in between presidential elections. So some really good advice there, Mark. We really appreciate your time this morning. You can find everything that he's talking about, some of those briefs, etc., at advancingamericanfreedom.com. You can follow them on X as well, at American Freedom. So we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
To sharpen the biblical worldview of Christians and to share the good news of Jesus Christ. That is the mission of the Christian Worldview radio program. I'm host David Wheaton, inviting you to join us this Saturday morning at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, as we discuss all matters of life and faith from a decidedly biblical perspective. The Christian Worldview, Saturday mornings at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, right here on American Family Radio.
The Awakening with Bishop E.W. Jackson.
We have not been made the greatest nation in the history of mankind by denigrating God. We have become the greatest nation on earth because we are a nation that acknowledged Almighty God to be the source of our values, our rights, our liberties, and that therefore we are accountable to Him.
The Awakening on the podcast page at afr.net.
So right now may be the perfect time for you to rethink how you pay for health care, and here's why. This time of year is decision time for a lot of people, but it's also when you can join Medi-Share and save even more than usual. For many families, joining Medi-Share means saving about $500 a month, which is a game changer for a lot of people. More than 1 million people are part of healthcare sharing now because it just makes so much sense right now. And Medi-Share is the gold standard. Members like it a lot. We know this from member surveys. Medi-Share has been around for over 30 years. It is a proven thing. And if you join before December 15th and you mention the promo code SHARE, they'll waive your application fee. So you save $100 right off the bat. I'll give you the number here in a second, but just call. You'll get a price within 2 minutes. And again, the deadline's December 15th. Call now. You'll save even more. Here's the number. It's 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
This is Bible League International. In this season of giving, would you remember that 9 of 10 new believers in the regions of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America go without what's so basic to the Christian faith, and that is having a Bible?
Everyone wants to read the Bible, but many of them will be sharing a single Bible.
If you were among those numbers, you would pray that someone, anyone, would bring you a Bible.
When I received Bible from the church, and I really love to read it again. And because of those reading, God is really blessing my heart.
AFR listeners, during December, will you help us bless 7,000 Bible-less believers so this year they can read for themselves the true Christmas story? $5 sends a Bible, $100 sends 20, $500 sends 100 Bibles. Call 800-YES-WORD. 800-YES-WORD. That's 800-YES-WORD, or give at sendbiblesnow.org.
I've seen people being changed by reading the scripture. Giving a Bible to somebody is the greatest gift you can give somebody in life.
Give at 800-YES-WORD or sendbiblesnow.org.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, speaking of hijacking political parties and, kind of taking over some of those things, the argument has been made for sure that President Trump himself is one of those hijackers, or maybe he's just a reformer. I don't know, but there is a very interesting article in the Washington Post, and the headline reads, "Trump pardons major drug traffickers despite his anti-drug rhetoric." So the president has granted clemency to about 100 people accused of drug-related crimes during his time in office, that analysis showed. And you all will recall that on Trump's first full day in office this year, he pardoned Silk Road founder Ross Ulbricht, who was convicted of creating the largest online black market for illegal drugs and other illicit goods of that time. I was very much against that. I think that was kind of to appease some of the libertarians And I'm not really sure that he kept his campaign promise to appoint a libertarian to the cabinet. Not sure. I don't know. Maybe at this point, RFK Jr. identifies as some sort of libertarian in some sense. But that his view of these pardons, I think, has been really fascinating. And there's been a giant question mark over not just the drug-related offenders that he has pardoned, but also now even reaching across the aisle into Democrats. So what's really going on? Because in the months since, according to the Post here as well, he's granted clemency to other drug-related offenders, including Chicago gang leader Larry Hoover and Baltimore drug kingpin Garnett Gilbert Smith. And then last week, he also pardoned former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who had been sentenced to 45 years in prison for running his country as a vast, quote unquote, narco state that helped to move at least 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. So let's welcome in Jared Folletti, who is senior counsel for the Lawfare Project. Jared, obviously these pardons are constitutional. I mean, the president has, full unfettered discretion to pardon literally whomever he wishes. But what's kind of the rationale, or is there one from the administration's perspective that you can see for these pardons?
Well, I think it's very hard to see the rationale, quite frankly, and I don't think the administration has done a fantastic job in explaining them. I think that in some cases, with the founder of Silk Road, for example, you do have that more libertarian bent that seems to think that some prosecutions were perhaps excessive. With the former president of Honduras, you could almost explain that as a foreign policy decision. We also have to look at the context that this guy, drug trafficker or not, was considerably more conservative than the current government of Honduras, and that there are political and foreign policy implications as well. But quite frankly, it's very hard to see the administration's rationale for some of these other pardons when you're looking at drug kingpins or people who've moved a significant amount of hard narcotics. It's difficult to see how that benefits society to have those exonerations take place.
It really does. And, there've long been concerns, frankly, about people around the president and, whether there has been some, perhaps money exchanging hands or, some of these positions, even in terms of filling the administration. But that can also potentially flow into pardons. Do you think that there's any kind of a purchase of pardons kind of possibility here that maybe there is some sort of nefarious actor within the Trump administration that's encouraging him to do this, maybe for the wrong reasons?
Well, I mean, considering that President Trump signs these pardons himself and there's no auto pen, I think it's less likely than in a previous administration that there is someone ultimately behind the scenes of these pardons. However, I think you have to be cognizant that money speaks, and it's not that money is changing hands, but people have more access when they have a broader position, a bigger position in society. So you do have the president, whoever the president may be, hearing disproportionately from the families and friends and business acquaintances of some people more than others. It takes efforts to get to the eyes and ears of the president when it comes to pardons, and people who are drug kingpins or have means otherwise are more likely than not to get the attention of the person in the Oval Office than your random John Doe on the street who was convicted of a crime.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And and yet you still have the pardons attorney for the DOJ, Ed Martin, who most recently facilitated the list of pardons for everyone outflowing the 2020 election, which included me. And he had posted his rationale, kind of lengthy form brief and all of that. To your knowledge, would all of these other pardons have to be facilitated through him before they reach the president's desk? I mean, obviously he can take unilateral authority, or and I was around Trump. Anybody who walked into his office, may raise a point and say, "Hey, here's a recommendation." But in terms of the overall process, generally, does that go through the pardons attorney and White House counsel, or the DOJ in some instances, so that there is a little bit more of a process, not just who has that type of access?
Well, to my knowledge, the process always goes through the DOJ attorneys, through the pardons attorney, and throughout White House counsel. However, they make recommendations. They don't give decisive controlling. They don't make the final decision. So if you have a pardon that's initiated by the president saying, hey, I heard about this case, look into it, I really want to give this guy a pardon, that's perhaps different than a case that is initiated through the formal process, because there you have a directed outcome, essentially, which is within the president's prerogative. But you do have that level of input from attorneys in the Justice Department who are looking at this case and providing advice on the merits. Whether or not that advice is listened to, ultimately is the president's responsibility.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I was talking to Gerard Folletti, who's a senior counsel for the Lawfare Project. And, it seems like this particular focus in the Washington Post, I mean, they're obviously, no fan of Donald Trump, but I think they raise an important question here. But overall, Americans, or at least those on the right, may not care as much about, these particular pardons or whatever, if it seemed like a lot more was getting done in terms of America First policy. But to have these 100 pardons when, there's a lot of executive orders and some other things, but we're really not seeing a whole lot of other advancement and wins on the Trump mandate side. Do you think that this story is really going to get any sort of traction from the left? Obviously, they're trying to, suggest somehow that Trump is kind of, twofold in this and not really focused on conservative priorities, or leading it up to the midterms, is this kind of a non-starter?
Yeah, anytime you have a story that paints Donald Trump or Republicans in a bad light, you will have the left-leaning media trying to make it a bigger story. And here I think they have tumbled onto something. On the one hand, you have missile strikes being authorized against Venezuelan drug targets. And on the other hand, you're pardoning someone who is described as a cartel leader. So, of course, the left is going to make an issue out of this. I think in this particular pardon, it's easier for the president to come back and point to the policy implications of having someone who is conservative and more of a friend and ally of America be pardoned and be eligible to influence America's relations in the region than other pardons. But ultimately, the White House does need to do a better job explaining some of these pardons, because they do deprioritize that America First agenda that President Trump was elected to implement.
Yeah, and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has said, at least according to this same article, said the pardon specifically of the Honduran president doesn't make it difficult to defend the administration's lethal strikes on suspected drug traffickers. And she said, quote, "I think that President Trump has been quite clear in his defense of the United States homeland to stop these illegal narcotics from coming to our borders, whether that's by land or by sea. He's also made it quite clear he wants to correct the wrongs of the weaponized Justice Department under the previous administration." So it sounds like, at least from that response, Gerard, that overall the White House at least is suggesting that this is more about correcting perhaps some of the over-prosecution or the weaponization of government, which really was part of the Trump mandate. To correct the weaponization of government. And so however that ultimately is defined by the Trump administration. So last 30 seconds for you.
Well, it was, and it is. And I think with President Trump, he is much more sensitive to the fact that there are wrongful convictions and prosecutions in America. And whether it's someone like the former president of Honduras or people who were wrongfully prosecuted for expressing their views, we do have someone in the Oval Office who is a lot more sensitive to the miscarriages of justice that have taken place than other administrations have been.
Yeah, well said, and I always appreciate your commentary, and a lot of interesting issues, and it's they're all very complex, and so it's important to kind of break a lot of this down and ask ourselves the question, what do we really think about this? So Gerard Folletti, thanks so much, and as always, you can reach me and my team at jenna@afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
It's been proven again and again and again.
Bert Harper.
The verification of the dates, the verification of the genealogies It puts spiritual iron in my spiritual blood to know that we can depend upon the Word of God.
Exploring the Word, weekday afternoons at 3 Central on American Family Radio. This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. President Trump visits Pennsylvania today on a tour highlighting his economic agenda, or the word everyone is using, affordability. White House Press Secretary Caroline Levin on what the president will say.
And President Trump is going to give a positive, economic-focused speech where he talks about all that he and his team has done to provide